So we go ahead, and I like to begin with acknowledging that I come from Mianjin, Brisbane, and from land of the Yagara and Turrbal people. Pay my respect to the elders past and present, and my commitment to supporting them in their struggle for self-determination. Today, we're going to talk about primary crime prevention, particularly emphasis on the primary and how it relates to youth work. Now, I've went ahead and sort of started writing a few things out and ended up like 15, 20 pages. And then I was trying to memorize it all, and I didn't get around to actually doing that. And a Murray friend of mine once said, do not believe anybody that talks from a sheet of paper. So I'm a bit hesitant to just read it from there. So I'll try to speak it, I guess, from memory, from heart, because that's where the writing comes from. It's basically my personal experiences that I'm going to share with you. And some of it you might find interesting, maybe not. Some of it you might find challenging. If it's challenging, I hope that you take that as a way of just me wanting to open up debate. And hopefully we can have that debate and discussion in a friendly way, and in a way that it's with a commitment to growth, because that's more than anything else. I feel that we need a lot of that in the youth sector. We don't have enough discussion and debate about actually what is youth work, what is it that we're doing out there. So that's the spirit that I'm coming, and hopefully you'll share that spirit with me, and we can have a good discussion. I thought I'd give you a little bit of background about myself, because in many ways it informs how I've gone about youth work and work that I've done in the last 30 years. So briefly, I'm come from Iran. I'm a Persian-speaking Iranian. I grew up in Iran. Till the age of 17, I was there. So I grew up first in a fairly comfortable middle-class family, had academic father and a teacher mother, and a fairly rosy childhood till I was 10. And then when I was about 10, we had a revolution in Iran that turned things upside down, and things went pear-shaped for us as family, as community, as society, as a country. And so things became really bad for us. My father was active political before the revolution, but because of his beliefs and stuff, he was kicked out of university. I was banned from 2 schools originally I was going to, and then eventually I was actually stopped from even going to night school and continuing any education. So from age about 13 to 17, I was out of school, and I was basically in low-skilled labor jobs, just trying to make money for survival, helping with the family and stuff. And during that time, we also entered our country. Iran went into war with Iraq as well, so we had that element added to it. And so in those years from when I was, those formative teenage years of 13 to 17, I was seeing basically a lot of people struggling in the community. And those struggles, part of that became that people were hustling and participating on some level of crime. If you put it, I put it as a survival, but you can also call it crime. But it was basically, I observed a lot of that. And at the time, there was no welfare system in Iran either. And what was fascinating for me was through a friend, I learned and became a little bit familiar with this underground movement that was happening, where there was these people who in a particular suburb of the city, quite a large part of the city, they provided protection for shop owners. And so they normally were people who would be known as criminals or thugs. But what they did was provided that security so that the streets were calm, that the shops weren't robbed, that the people could go into the shops without getting harassed. And in return for that, the shopkeepers provided them with goods or with some cash on the side. And so it wasn't something that then these people used for themselves. They then very discreetly dispersed the money or the goods to those people in need in the community. And it was done in a very quiet way, in a way that the privacy and dignity of everybody was really respected and preserved. So that was my first sort of introduction to unofficial welfare, which I was fascinated by. Anyhow, eventually, when I was 17, with a group of friends, we made it outside Iran. We managed to illegally cross the border to Pakistan, and then from there to India. And I spent 2 years in Pakistan and India as a young refugee. And it was there that I sort of became familiar, became aware, or in a way involved with much higher level criminals, because they were the ones who, these people smugglers, who we had to rely on to help us trying to get out of Pakistan and India, try to go to one of the Western countries, somewhere better to settle. And so these people, so people smuggling was their side work, but their main work was basically smuggling drugs and arms. So they were highly, I guess, notorious and organized criminal syndicates in a way. And we put basically our livelihood was in their hand, and we had to trust them, but unfortunately we found out in a bad and a sort of hard way that they're not very trustworthy. We lost all our money, and later we found out that part of that was that they basically first of all, they basically ripped you off. They took all your money, and then when you were down and really desperate, then they would offer you a chance to become a mule for them and to take a suitcase of drugs to a European country in exchange for giving you a passport and a ticket. And that was sort of your ticket to freedom, I suppose, that they were trying to say. But as we observed, many people went to hellholes of jails in either India, or they made it to a country like Spain, and then they spend the rest of their lives behind bars. So we, the group of us, we had lost our money. We were really pissed off with these people. So basically ourselves got our head around how to basically buy passports from people coming through the India, tourists, how to change photos in passports, how to bribe police in the airport, how to bribe people in airline agency to issue tickets on false passports, and help people basically like us that were coming from Iran out, that still had money, to basically not get caught in that criminal syndicates of the drug dealers. And so I was there, and my, I guess, desire was to change that lifestyle and do something else with my life. And I was very lucky that I was accepted to, in 1987, to migrate to Australia on the humanitarian ground. And I arrived in 87 in Townsville, and all I wanted to do was focused on bettering myself and making a lot of money, because we were poor for several years. So I started doing a lot of jobs, and on the side of it, I started catching up with education, and spent a couple of years trying to get my level of English, and also get a TE score, and eventually ended up in getting accepted in uni up there to do business commerce. And I started doing that, and life was all about myself and a career in business commerce. And then on side of it, I got a job accidentally to do a couple of shifts in a youth shelter. And I had no idea, to be honest with you, about poverty or anything like that in Australia. I didn't believe that it existed. So it was my first encounter with kids, with children that I saw coming from poverty. And after that, I also got another job in the drop-in center, which was not young people's drop-in center, it was an adult drop-in center. And that also exposed me to further poverty and issues of racism and a whole lot of things that I was quite shocked, because I thought I've come to a first world country that doesn't have those sort of problems, because it's a rich country. But I guess it sort of hit me hard, because I thought Australia saved my life as a young person that was sort of caught in poverty and caught in crime and all of that. And here I am, but now I'm actually seeing that Australia itself has got those problems inside. And I couldn't put the two together, that how come they're taking people from across the world, but then there's people here that are suffering, and they're not doing much to help them. And I became fascinated, and so it didn't take long before I actually gave up my career in business commerce, and I actually went to youth work, and I picked that up as a full-time job and furthered my studies and became a full-time youth worker. Now, in that time, it was, I guess, I didn't also know much about the welfare system in Australia, and I learned it was a crash course for me. And a lot of it, what I saw, I didn't like. It was a lot of focus on trying to fix individuals. So I guess my reference was myself, and I kept saying, when I was in those sort of situations, if somebody would come and patronize me and trying to fix me as opposed to the circumstances that I was in, how would I feel? And that was sort of my reference. And so the more I sort of searched around that, the more I guess I was, I moved towards more of an understanding of the other models that were on the side of the welfare system in Australia, such as community development, which I became more interested in. And but I couldn't see much of that happening in the youth sector. But then in the mid-90s, the Queensland government put out a program called Youth and Community Combined Action, YACA. And they advertised that as a primary crime prevention. And when I looked at the literature from that and what they put out, they basically were saying that they're wanting to allow communities to do whatever they decide in the community that needs doing. And so there wasn't any dictating from the top that this is the program and this is what you got to do. These are the outcomes. It was more broad of, it's a broad about the concept. So I first started looking at the crime prevention was that. And so that's where sort of I started looking at the models of crime prevention. And so I sort of learned, and I'll put in the chat about the, broadly about the 3 models of crime prevention, which are the primary crime prevention that it's the focus of our talk today, the secondary crime prevention, and the tertiary crime prevention. With the primary crime prevention, I guess the focus is on situational issues. It's about socio-economic issues. It's about, I guess, looking at things like poverty, unemployment, systemic stuff. So things that I was interested in, which I saw in that. And then the secondary crime prevention, which was what I saw most youth agencies are doing, which was more about young people at risk and trying to put something around them or help them to make sure that they, I guess, don't become more entrenched in youth crime. And then the tertiary one, which was, I guess, once they're in the youth justice system, young people and the work that gets done in youth prisons or outside in the youth justice services, things like youth justice conferencing or what programs such as Transition to Success or whatever it is that the youth justice runs. So the broad 3 sort of kinds of crime prevention that I sort of learned, and they're the sort of more encompass the theoretical models behind crime prevention. So you can have some smaller subset, but in summary, they're the main 3 types. So I applied for a job. I was still in Townsville, but I applied for a job to become one of these workers in one of these places in Deception Bay, which is a low socioeconomic community north of Brisbane. And I moved there and basically started my work in Deception Bay. And so what happened in Deception Bay was that we looked at, the first thing we did was we looked at all the statistics available. So all the ABS stats, any kind of trying to find out any research, which there wasn't much, and any data that we could get from health department, education department, all of that, and started aggregating that data and looking and analyzing that data. And then the population wasn't that huge. It was about 2,000, around that sort of a population. So we surveyed 2,000 households. So we surveyed everyone, all the households in the suburb as well, and all young people that we could find. And now when I say all young people, a lot of that was done through the high schools. So we did miss a lot of young people who weren't engaged in the high school. But in doing all of that, we found out that the community was suffering from feeling that it was a very bad place to live, Deception Bay. There wasn't anyone that was proud of being there. They called the suburb not Deception Bay, they called it Depression Bay. It was one of the things that we learned. The other name that it had was Inala by the Sea. So Inala being western suburb of Brisbane, again, low socio-economic community, and which was known a little bit. So it had that sort of connotation that was Inala by the Sea. And things were really bad. There was basically really high unemployment rate among the adult population. It was 100% almost unemployment rate for young people. There were absolutely no jobs. And we found that Deception Bay had the highest rate of youth crime in the state. So it was fairly notorious, and the things that we were seeing happening, it was basically young people hitting back at the society that had left them there. So they were just doing things to, I guess, have fun, but it was things like one of the hobby was get a motorbike and make a lot of noise. Eventually somebody will call the police would come. They will jump off the bike, run around from backyards to backyards, and while the police are chasing them, the other young people will go and tip the car, a police car over, set fire to it. It was quite wild. It was like, wild days in Deception Bay. And police hated it because it was a wild place and there was no police station. So police used to be called from Redcliffe or Caboolture, which are a good 20, 30 minutes away. So it wasn't easy for them to call for backup, and they felt very vulnerable because they'll find themselves amongst groups of sometimes 100 young people. And these are fairly full-on young people having a go at them. So they hated it. And eventually they built a police station there, and no police wanted to actually work there because they hated the suburb. So I remember when it was first open, I went in there to actually introduce ourselves to them. And on the notice board, the cops had put a sign up saying Deception Bay sucks. So that was their attitude to coming to a new community. But we went ahead, and one of the things, I guess, our interest with being in community development, we went ahead and decided that we need to actually get the community on board with whatever it is that we want to do. So we set up a subcommittee. We were still under auspice of the neighborhood center back then. We set up a subcommittee, and we went and particularly searched for people from different walks of life. So we invited the principal of the high school. We invited one of the priests that ran one of the local churches. We got a teacher. We got somebody that worked out of the suburb in an employment agency. I think it was called, those days, it was Skillshare back then. It was like an employment agency. And even a detective from the local police service. We got this detective on board as well. And we had 2 or 3 young people on board. And basically, together, we started, first of all, incorporating the organization, giving it values which were embedded in community development and primary crime prevention, and wanting to do something to change the structures in the community. And that was the key thing about having that vision from day one, and then getting the people on board that are interested in moving towards the same vision. And then they also became ambassadors and started selling that, strategy to the broader community. And that was greatly helpful in how then the work that we did was accepted by the community. And the lucky thing was that community had never had a youth agency in it before. So there was no preconceived notion of what a youth agency should do. So what we were doing, which was the more broadly community development kind of work, where it was accepted as that's what you do as youth workers. And so we started looking at things like, we got the business people together to try to see that whether they can create jobs for young people. And then we realized that the business people, they're in a bad way themselves. They're all saying they're struggling. So we actually called a meeting. They came together and we said, well, let's talk together of how you can help one another. And that initial meeting went on to become the Chamber of Commerce for the suburb. And so in a way, the youth agency helped set up a Chamber of Commerce. The other thing that we did was, because what we saw in terms of people looking down on the suburb, we thought it'd be good to actually have some way of celebrating what is good about the suburb. So we started planning to have a community festival, which was like a year and a half of work. We involved over a dozen community arts workers from Brisbane and surround, skilled community arts workers, to come and work with the community, from doing music to doing street parades to a range of stuff, to actually create a community festival. That on the side of the festival, we also, one of the early things we did was, it was the early days of internet, and we found a group of people in Brisbane that were, came from rough backgrounds themselves, but they had got their head around HTML, and they were doing programming HTML for, at that first stage, for like banks and sort of big industry stuff, and making suddenly a lot of money. So we got these people to come to Deception Bay and train young people there on HTML programming. So by mid-90s, there were a group of young people in Deception Bay who started programming. And one of the first things they did was they set up a digital art gallery for Deception Bay. So it was a virtual gallery that you walked into and had different rooms for like visual arts, poetry, music. And then another group of young people went around the suburb door knocking and asking people whether they participated or whether they did anything like poetry or music. And then they took their art and uploaded it to this virtual gallery. And then we, at the festival, we unveiled this basically art gallery, and the community was just mesmerized by the fact that they couldn't believe that there was so many artists, so many amazing stuff happening. And on the side, there was also other research that we had done about the history that went on that website and all other places to visit around Deception Bay. And so it was a way of lifting the spirit of the community. And that festival then became a whole association, and it became an annual event itself. And then we stepped back again. So it's similar to the Chamber of Commerce. It was sort of help kickstarting something and then stepping back. So there was a range of this sort of work that we were doing in Deception Bay that was sort of working quite well. But on the side, there was still a cohort of young people who weren't really engaging in these. And they were still, I guess, participating in more in the criminal activities. So we were hearing about them, we could see them, but they weren't engaging. So we decided, what's it going to take to actually engage them? We had an agency, we would sort of promote, we would put like, posters up and have pizza nights and movie nights and all of that sort of stuff. They wouldn't come near us. And so it was clear that we actually needed to do something a bit more about trust building. So we started asking around of, is there anybody that already does any work with these young people? And we found out a lot of people talked about this guy called Rob. They're saying, oh yeah, this guy, older guy called Rob that goes out on Friday, Saturday nights with a van. We think he's involved with one of the churches. He goes and feeds young people, and sometimes he takes them home when there's nowhere for them to go. And so we were a little bit sus, being sort of trained youth workers, about what's going on and like, whether he's a dodgy guy or not. But I actually went and met with him and found him to be a really interesting guy. He was at the time worked for Telstra and during the day, and just basically on the weekend, out of his own pocket, he would go out. And he was involved with one of the churches. He would ask for volunteers and they would go out and basically hang out with young people, do street work. And they had no idea what youth work is, but they basically sat there with young people, listened to them, fed them, helped them when they were in crisis, including when they needed housing, trying to find a place, including taking them to their own places. So it took a while before I kept talking with this Rob and stuff like that. And I actually found him, as I said, to be very genuine and highly skilled in working with these young people. And it took a bit of twisting on, because he had worked for Telstra for 20, 30 years, and he didn't want to lose all his retirement stuff, for me to convince him that he's actually a fantastic youth worker and to come and employ. I said, I want to employ you as a full-time youth worker. And so I eventually got him on board as a full-time youth worker, and then helped him go through the process of getting his qualification and over time, and became a qualified youth worker. But through him, we had our first contact with that cohort of young people that we weren't before having any opportunity to connect with. And that helped a lot in terms of that trust building. Now, I thought that, like, myself coming from some of those backgrounds of roughing it in, like, for a few years as refugee in sort of desperate countries and stuff, that these young people will, and in a way, in Townsville, when I was working in youth shelters, you were there and young people were there. So the engagement was almost like, it wasn't a voluntary engagement. It was almost like, they had no other option. But this was young people in the streets. So they would, I guess, vote with their feet, and they weren't still coming too close to us, and they were still hesitant. So they'll talk to Rob, but not so much me. It took a good few years before I built enough sort of trust with them so that I was accepted. It takes time. There's no shortcut. Many things happened, and eventually one of the things that cemented it was one day where I basically lost it, where I saw the local security guard was bashing a young person, and I intervened, and the word got out there. And so from there on, there was a different sort of approach to me. But I guess what I sort of found out that because by then we became incorporated, we had some funding. I could employ a number of youth workers, that we needed different youth workers with different skills. That youth work is not just one thing. So we needed people like Rob that had the skill set to be out there engaging with young people. But we needed also other youth workers that were center-based, that could actually run some activities there, or be able to organize referrals and take young people to other services and to follow up for other things that with employment agency, all of that. So we employed a range of people with a range of different skills, and doing basically horses for courses based on their knowledge and skills and life experience, doing various elements of that. And some of the work crossed over, but some of it basically it couldn't happen. So, like, we had some highly qualified youth workers that came from well-off backgrounds, that had never roughed it. And I found that was almost unethical as well as dangerous to try to send them out to do street work. So even though I was sort of like, tested sometimes of sending one of them with Rob, trying to teach them about street work, it was dangerous. It was, and they, I guess, in terms of, we spend more time trying to debrief with them and trying to actually support them, because they weren't used to what they were seeing, and they didn't know it was the qualification did not give you the skill set necessary to actually how to deal with some of the situations that happen in the street. So it was more we became, well, we have to actually support one another as an organization and have those different roles, but make sure that everyone is supported and the young people can transition in that organization in those in a side way amongst the workers. So there was basically two arms to our approach. One was about building community development, building the community, looking at the infrastructure, looking at what was needed socially. On the other hand was, how do we engage with the most highly marginalized young people? And in the middle of it, there was the broader young people that I guess if nothing would happen, they would fall into those margins, which some of the work didn't happen with them. But with that, those sort of two ends of working with the community and the highly marginalized young people, we managed to then do some projects that were quite successful in actually having the whole of community on board to supporting, and also having an impact on crime. So, for example, like, one of the local shops was run by two brothers that were from Pakistan. Now, there was huge amount of racism against them. They were constantly broken into, they were abused, there was a lot of problem around this shop. So we basically had discussion with these shop owners and convinced them that it'd be good to actually for them to come and build a relationship with these young people, and started taking them on activities outside the bay. And we got them to sponsor those activities. So when we go out to some sort of like a camping or somewhere that will take young people, we made sure that the young people knew that the food and the drinks were supplied by these guys. And over time, they developed their respect for these guys, and they actually became their protector. So even the young people that didn't know them, if they went near the shop to do something, these other young people will stop them. So it became similar to that situation where I earlier was saying my experience in Iran of the local shopkeepers having somebody to protect them. These young people became the local protectors of the shop rather than being the tormentors. We looked at a lot of employment projects because that was, as I said, was 100% unemployment, was hard to do. So we looked at social enterprise. So we actually brought some people to facilitate that. And one of the, early on, what we did, a couple of people that we were running workshops, they said, well, who are the drug dealers in the suburb among young people? We want to work with them. So we actually unofficially brought those young people that we knew they were dealing into this workshop, because the people who ran the social enterprise basically convinced me. They said, these people know about economy, they know about money. So it's about, if you show them then a different way that you can make money, they're the first one who come on board. They also have got a following. So then you bring other young people on board. So then again, that was another way that we actually influenced a large group of young people, was by saying, well, who are some of the leaders or who are the key young people who actually can influence young people? Then we looked at, as I said, the business was suffering itself. We actually sent people out there to talk to businesses about what would, if they had an opportunity in life to do something, what that would be if money wasn't the case. So like there was a guy that used to poison timber for a living. And he said to the worker that we had sent out there, he said that, well, I would do fishing. And then we basically told them, well, what if there was a way, because we know some young people that actually are fishing, what about your business skills? Can we combine them? And so then we started putting those people together and starting small enterprises, which then were supported by business people based on their passion and the skills that young people had. So skills like, as I said, young people were going fishing already. Or then another group of young people started making canoes, Canadian canoes that they made out of fiberglass with another business person, started selling them. And there was another group of young people who became involved with a retired woodworker, and they started using the woodwork equipment at high school, and they made toys for children, wooden toys, and they started selling them. So we started generating that sort of employment, but it was really hard because still there was not much money in the community to spend. So, and this community was isolated. And there was, it was hard to sell outside the community. There was still no internet and stuff back then for sales. So it was basically limiting. So one of the other ways that employment, we had to look outside the box, was that actually one of our youth workers went all the way to Stanthorpe in southwest of Queensland and found a fruit farmer that was prepared to take young people on for fruit picking. And he said, doesn't matter how rough they are, I'm not going to be a social worker. They have to turn up. If they turn up for work, I will have them on board. But they can swear, they can do whatever, they can wear whatever they want. They just have to do work. So these young people were like that. They, you know, most of them didn't wear shoes, and they swore like in every 10 words, 11 of it was a swear word. And then one of our youth workers would go each time, would take 3 or 4 of them to Stanthorpe and stay there for 2 weeks, and every morning basically support the young people, get them up, get them to work, and make sure that they first got their first couple of paychecks, and they started settling in, made sure in that period of time, all the Centrelink, all of those sort of things were solved, so they didn't give up and go doing other things. And they settled, and once they started getting their paychecks, they had never seen that much money. And then they were also started mixing with backpackers from around the world. And so the world suddenly became widely open, and they started talking about I've heard about this thing happening in this European country, or this thing happening in Thailand, and I'm saving up to go there. So they started developing different aspirations for their lives. And I always explain to politicians, when I try to give these sort of stories in a quick sort of 1-minute thing, I tell them it's like when you're in those sort of situations, in those communities, it's like having a rotten onion. You hold to it very hard because that's the only thing you've ever had, and you still cherish that, and you won't give that up until the time that somebody slowly gives you an apple, and you start tasting the apple, and you develop a taste for apple, and slowly you start giving away that rotten onion. Other than that, they'll hold on to it. So this was our approach. So it was, and it paid dividends by the fact that these young people sort of grew up and sort of became different people, started traveling, started generating money, started bringing back money to the community and spending. And so people, so as I said, there was a range of activities, from festival to, you know, working in the Chamber of Commerce, those sort of broad social stuff, to actually working with street level young people and doing that kind of stuff. Another thing was homelessness, that I guess was big. So there were some young people that we need were sleeping in the bushes in different places. We actually heard about this woman called Karen, that a lot of young people keep saying they're staying at Karen's place. And sometimes, like in a week, we'll hear about 10, 15 or more young people who are saying we're staying at Karen's place. So eventually we found out where this Karen lives and who this Karen is. And we went and knocked on her door. Again, we were concerned what was going on, whether, like, you know, Karen is, again, dodgy drug dealer using these young people, or, like, you know, more dodgy than even that thing's happening. We went there and we saw, no, Karen actually herself, she had 4 kids of her own, and they all were struggling. They had some disabilities. 2 or 3 of them had disabilities. And she came from a genuine good heart again, and she had come from that sort of background herself. And she basically couldn't see these young people sleeping in the street, and would just put an extra mattress and allow them to stay there. And so we basically asked her, what do you need? How can we support you? And she said, well, I struggle with my pension, what I get, to feed all of them. And a lot of them are not on any benefits. So by end of the week, we run out of food. So we don't organize to basically from local shops and stuff to do food drop-offs there. So we basically help them in that way. And these were the young people that we couldn't get to any youth shelters. Again, because they were so, I guess, marginalized, some of these young people, that they were really rough, and they also were on drugs. They were also violent, a range of stuff that happens when you're sort of pushed in that sort of margins. So the shelters wouldn't take them. So it was either street or Karen's place, and Karen became one of the safer places. And basically it was costing us nothing because the local businesses were supporting it. And there was basically an official youth shelter operating that otherwise would have costed millions to put in and staff. So that's partly, like, you know, I like the fact that, like, you know, there's element of the sector that moves towards operating more professionally. But on the other hand, I also very concerned that that sort of professional growth also has stopped some of that volunteering that used to go hand in hand or arm in arm with youth work. And this sort of work that used to happen there with people with genuine, I guess, with lives, with personal history and sort of lived experience, who would get involved. And these days we have less and less of that because of the blue card and because of we need qualification and all of that. And we're missing on a big asset, which is really needed in my view in terms of engaging with those hardly marginalized young people. Back then, like, you know, most of the youth workers in that sort of context knew where the young people will sleep rough. They were trusted to know where they are. Some of them were squats. Some of those squats, there was all manners of illegal stuff happening from that, but they were sort of fairly assured that the youth workers were never going to, I guess, sell them to police. And so there was that sort of a trust, unofficial trust. And again, some of that, I guess it has been eroded, that sort of a trust between a youth worker and a young person in modern times. What else do I say? So I guess I don't want to keep, I want to have some time for us to actually, for you to have a say, ask questions and all of that. I guess if I summarize sort of, again, key points for me is that young people are not homogeneous. We have to look at issues of class, gender, race, sexuality, disability, all of that. That voluntary engagement of young people, particularly marginalized young people, it's not something that just comes automatically. So if we're wanting to young people on the real margins to voluntarily engage with us as youth workers, then we have to put the time and resources and have the skill set necessary. And over time, that trust gets built. It's not a given thing. That's got to be worked out. It's a more of a long-term strategy. And that we need, if we're wanting to engage in that broad primary crime prevention, we can't just work with young people. We have to work with the entire community. And we have to have their trust. We have to have them on board and have their support. And that, I guess, to me, it's a very fine line between what I'm describing and what community development is. Although it's not sort of like, promoted that way. But if anyone's interested in that sort of broad primary crime prevention, learning about community development, I think, is paramount to the knowledge necessary for engaging in the terms of how do we then work with the community and have, so collectively we do something as a community rather than seeing ourselves as above, as an agency going there doing things for people. So I might stop there and I guess open up to comments, questions. So let's make this interactive.
Hi, Siyavash. I guess I was curious about what you think. You briefly touched on it, kind of like the importance of youth workers with lived experience and kind of that on grounds in touch. But what your thoughts are on kind of, I guess, the modern landscape where we have to kind of like abide by insurance and like general codes of ethics. Like, hear lots of stories about lots of youth workers who, go that extra mile, who might not be abiding to traditional social worker standards, like dropping young people home, where we understand that that's like, it opens up to potential some people taking abuse of that power. But it also seems to have a lot of like really good connection for the young people and young people trusting them. So I guess, what are your thoughts around that?
It's complex, so it's not a simple thing. And like, the work that we do as youth worker is incredibly complex, the issues that we're dealing with, and you're basically highlighting that complexity. But I think what we've done is just thrown away the baby with the bathwater and saying it's entirely bad. And I don't think that's the case. I think there was a lot of good in it. It was, I guess it's about a code of ethic. I guess, like, I've been dead set against the code of ethic for a sector because I believe that that's a way of then agencies not having a code of ethic. But if you embed a code of ethic which is alive in an agency and on a weekly basis, daily basis, you basically live by that code and discuss and grow as a youth workers in an agency. Part of that code is that, well, where is the fine line that you actually, what are the things you do with and you don't do with young people? And if that code is clear, and if the values are there, the organization that, supports the sort of work that whatever it takes, are we on the side with young people or are we on the side with the state? And I say that, let me just put this quote by our colleagues, which, where is it? Where can I message? Where is my message gone? Okay, sorry. I'm just putting this in the message box. Did that, is that posting or, you know? Yeah, so this was from 2009, our colleagues in England that they were frustrated with the way youth work was going. They actually put an open letter out and basically says 30 years ago, this is in 2009, 30 years ago, youth work aspired to a special relationship with young people. It wanted to meet young people, women and men, on their terms. It claimed to be on their side. 3 decades later, youth work is closer to abandoning this distinctive commitment. Today, it accepts state's term, it sides with the state's agenda. And I guess that's what we sort of like, become a arm of the government in terms of what services, what money we get, what services they purchase, and how we go about delivering them, rather than actually sitting with young people, sitting in community and seeing ourselves what is needed, and then deciding what bit of it could be responded to with government funding and what bit of it requires other mediums. And I guess for me is that we're never going to have enough money to put tens of thousands of youth shelters across the state. And even if we did, it would be a terrible thing. So what are the other models? What are the other models that allows that young people actually to stay in their communities? And so to me, Karens of the world that I described here in Deception Bay, which are prepared to take those young people, are a model. People who are prepared to do that, and they require the support. And so it is about having some level of monitoring, making sure that, like, having on a weekly basis, talking with young people. And if you have that relationship with young people, very quickly, they will tell you if Karen there also gets them to drop drugs to somebody else's place or not. Or, the young people are very honest in that way. And so in that way, you actually work out who are the genuine people in the community, because we want that, because that's how you build community. The community is about the community taking responsibility. And so when we have people in the community take responsibility now, like people that I described, Rob and Karen, we ostracize them, we ban them, we say they're dodgy people, and let's give money to Siyavashs of the world to set up another youth service and let the professionals do that. It's not going to happen. First of all, we can't do that work, and there's never going to be enough money. We don't have the skills. And at the end of the day, even if all of that was, we're basically breaking down a community. So I think as hard as it is, it's one of those things that we have to struggle with, but work out how to deal with it in an ethical way, that work continues.
Hey, Siyavash, some really good points there. But coming back to what you said earlier, I think the restrictions that government puts on us, I think ever since Anna Bligh came in Queensland, there's been an attitude of the only programs that are good are the ones that come from government or are dictated by government, and rather than looking at community and what community contributes. And fully with you on the whole, more community development approach and the more human approach. I mean, as you probably remember, our charity's been doing that for, my God, 24 years now. Yeah, with very dedicated people, and, some with really high qualifications and others just really good, individuals that have been helping to run our youth programs and our youth camps.
Absolutely. Yeah, always admire your work, and people like yourself, Bernd, that don't, it's not based on funding the whole operation. It's based on a need in the community and actually doing it and still agitating for funding because you rightly deserve it. There should be more funding. There should be acknowledgement of services like what you do. It's a sad state of that, we have very little investment. Most of the investment in Queensland goes towards tertiary end. So those 3 tiers that I said about crime prevention, we have hundreds of millions of dollars, literally, that goes in building prisons and managing them. It takes about, used to, in the 2 prisons was 100 million a year just managing them. For every young person, it was $500,000 a year. So every 2 young people we put in youth prison, we spend $1 million. So the money is monumental there. And then also all the other money that goes into youth justice, or to I guess things like PCYC and stuff that still doesn't allow. It's all at the best, it becomes that secondary crime prevention. But in terms of primary prevention, the only one that I've known that has existed in Queensland, it's been that one that was Yakka, that went from mid-90s to early 2000, and then it disappeared and was never replaced. And it's really sad. Like there was another program that for 2 years was funded through the Federal Attorney General, and it was a pilot crime prevention program. And I remember at the end of that, I went and visited the worker in Gunduvindi, and they were winding up. And I remember his name was Kevin, Murray fellow there. And I said, Kevin, so what happened with all the learning? You were doing great work. He said, we kept filing these reports, outcomes, and this and that, and nobody ever got back to us about any of it. And now they've taken the funding away. But you know what? We had 3 people come over from Tony Blair's office in England. They had seen one of those reports online, and they were interested in what we were doing. So people from Prime Minister's office in England sends 3 people to Gunduvindi because they thought that there was some interesting work that some Murray fellow was doing with young people there in that community. And our Federal Attorney General funds this pilot program and then takes the funding away, and no learning is documented or anything happens.
Well, so same with our charity. You know, we in 2010 we got invited to an investment in youth prevention conference in Stockholm. You know, and then in 2017 we got you know, a finalist in the Telstra Business Awards charities. You know, and yet the government doesn't recognise that.
I'm Kate from Community Connections down in Nunda and Meerjen. I'm just curious where you're from.
Me, we charities based on the Gold Coast.
Yeah, right. Cool.
Yeah, and our programs, you know, the camps, we've mainly run Gold Coast, Brisbane Kids, Sunshine Coast, but our in-school way of community program we've run at major centres, at schools, right up to Cairns.
And what do they focus on?
Giving kids, well, number one, taking kids away from their, you know, their sense of, you know, trouble, building their understanding of what community is really about and what their role and responsibilities are as part of a community, communication, cooperation, eco-knowledge and leadership.
Yeah, right.
You know, we've had some incredible stories of kids, you know, but the sad part is, you know, like in 2022, for the first time in 20 years, we actually got state government funding for our programs. And we had to virtually badger, because of the break with no funding and then COVID, we literally had to badger South East Queensland Education Office to help us reach out to the schools again, because a lot of the contacts that we originally had that were referring kids had moved on during COVID, or to other schools. Out of 219 guidance officers at South East Queensland schools, we got 9 responses for a free program. Yeah, it's pretty sad, I think, really.
What does that speak to for you, Bernard, as to why the guiders were not as engaged?
I think largely with the lapse, no flow on, as I said, from the teachers or guidance officers or principals who were previously referring kids to the program or booking our in-schools. And secondly, pressure. You know, last year, school started, if I remember correctly, a month late. So the curriculum was compacted. And the third thing is, you know, and I remember talking to the Minister for Education some years back, And she said, oh, we don't make recommendations to schools. You have to talk to the principal. And on the other hand, you know, I remember a conversation with one principal, oh, I don't need a program like that. I've got a mate who runs leadership programs.
Mm.
You
Yeah.
know, and I think it's wrong that the principals, to a degree I understand it, but that the principals have total say of what programs are run in their schools, and that the education department will not make recommendations, except in a case where, you know, it's like a high profile thing, like what's the name of the family, you know, where the boy was abducted.
Daniel
That was
Mortham.
that was widely promoted by the state government within schools. So they're breaking their own rules, and yet, you know, not assisting community-based programs that have a track record of over 20 years.
Yeah, and there's a couple of things that stand out to me, which is partly that reclaiming of the type of practice we want to do post-pandemic. So that group work, project work, ways of being there physically in school spaces, reminding them there's these physical communities out there and not just online communities. And I know that our work in early intervention and prevention to young people's homelessness is actively in that space as well. And, you know, with a mixture of some of those first to know workers getting it because they were there and they were there before the pandemic, and then the newbies coming on board, like lots of starting from scratch to support them in their understanding of earlier intervention referral, diversionary activities, not just seeing everything as a crisis response when it's too late. And then I'm also really reminded of some of the structural changes that occurred, particularly when Campbell Newman was in government as well, that shifted those education systems to I think they call them public-private relationships, where principals did get the delegation of all that decision-making, as you're saying. So some things centralised and a lot of it sitting down at that school level, which increases the workload for us because we then have to work with every one of those school sites and adapt our practice to that.
And the other problem, Kate, with that is that when you have some of the worst schools that we know that need actually something done, it's the principal of that school that has to pick that up rather than headquarters saying that that school needs, say, for instance, to deal with racism or something like that.
Yeah,
spot on.
Yes.
Wendy, you have your hands up as well. Do you
Thanks.
want to...
Yeah, on the same schools issue, because I worked for the Child Youth Mental Health Service and worked within schools quite a lot. And I would say, especially when Bernard, you said that you're offering a free program, sometimes I was offering free training, but often the schools had such a low capacity that they couldn't even explore stuff outside of what they were already doing. And certainly I saw a bit of a shift in the past couple of years towards a bit of decentralization. Thankfully, the regional centers were talking about that decentralization, but also empowering principals to make better decisions for their schools with better support. But of course, then the principals in those areas, like for example Deception Bay, would be so more lower resource that they wouldn't even think of being able to have 5 teachers off to do a day of training because they couldn't afford any substitute teachers. So even if it was a free program, the schools weren't enabled to take those kinds of things on, and they were often told by the state, oh, you've got access to this and you have to do this. So there's a lot of kind of structural barriers there. But I think there's some positive changes, but yeah.
And when
to add to that, just the other problem we found is the difficulty of actually communicating with schools. And again, it comes down to the fact that, you know, each principal will have a different admin structure, and there will be different, you almost cannot pinpoint who the decision maker is, or you cannot get through to the principal if the principal is the decision maker. Because now with working through email, you know, often we found that emails get dismissed by, you know, a part-time helper in admin, and don't even get through to a decision maker or the principal.
Yeah.
Hey folks, I can speak a little bit to some of that stuff. I'm currently working as a adventure-based youth worker. I've previously been a high school guidance counsellor, so everything I'm hearing from you guys sounds very familiar. Certainly my experience of being working in a busy high school is there's a lot of focus on reaction, a lot of firefighting. And the irony is it's in the job description of a GO to demonstrate some level of proactive and preventative programming. So it's there, but you certainly have identified the siloed nature of education, especially EQ, because you've got the independent public schools, which came in under the Newman administration. And it essentially means that until the power brokers are each individual principal, and if that doesn't fit with their strategic goals of what they're seeking to achieve, it simply won't happen. One of the questions I had, and this might be fraught with a bit of controversy, but I am wondering if you can speak to any of the gendered nature of this issue, particularly the male dimension. I know in this culture we're less and less comfortable talking about those types of things, but I'm just hearing some fairly evidence-based stuff that, and I'm very much in my work involved with a lot of male mentoring stuff. And I'm just interested in terms of the socialization factors. First of all, what is the break of offenders by a gender percentage? And, is there things that can be done that are maybe being missed in this culture due to some ideological and political stuff?
Well, here's a fact for you. There was a 4 states crime conference in, if I think correctly, 2008, Vic, New South, South Australia and Queensland. And the stats that came out of that was a significant increase in youth crime for kids, 10 to 14. But the worst increase rate was with girls. And I've seen that, articles we have on file, of, girls bashing a pensioner on a bus, these 2 girls bashing and ripping off a grandmother in Southport for her purse. Unfortunately, the female gender is becoming a lot more aggressive.
Right. So the violent femmes are joining the angry boys, eh?
Yeah.
Right, yeah, that's what we hear as well, what Ben said before, that, currently the stats are we still have more young males in prison than young girls, but that definitely both the rate is going up and also the level of violence. So that's also has been one of the concerns there. But as a colleague of us a couple of days ago said, it's said that people are hurting in the community, and young people are just they're just reflecting. It's like young people are just a mirror to what a society is. They're not aliens that haven't just dropped from somewhere else. They're here. They've grown up in our communities, and when they're basically going through levels of abuse and neglect and hurt, that's so much that basically that's what we see is a reflective of what's going on in their life. And so then we get surprised. Well, surprise, surprise. This is our community. This is our society. Unless we change, we're going to produce more and more of them.
Yeah, and as you said before, Siyavash, it's a whole range of social factors. It's quite diverse, which is why we've always left our, camp referrals open to either principals or guidance officers, because they know you know, what the influencing factors are on a particular child and which children need the support.
One other thing that I neglected, I knew I should have looked at my notes, but it's really important, is that it's a criticism of ourselves. And I was like, you know, a major part of that. So for all those years that I explained what I was doing Deception Bay, the government didn't get to hear hardly any of those stories. And I was part of, like, you know, the belief that we got to do whatever we got to do, whatever it takes, and tell them whatever they want to hear to get the money. So basically, we developed a very sophisticated ways of documenting stats, and there was enough young people going through that we could justify that we were doing more than enough to get the funding, and that's all we reported. And we didn't tell them these stories that I'm telling you, that what it actually takes to actually work. So they don't know. And in hindsight, I think that was a mistake. And I think one of the big challenges that we should take on as youth sector is about actually telling the stories of what we do. We do very little of that. It's so important to not just be, like, you know, reporting on outcomes and outputs and numbers and those things that comes from the head office that you report against, but actually those subtleties of what it takes, the 3 years that it might take to build that basic relationship with a young person. That's really important, all the fine-tuned stuff, because that's the one that never gets funded, because we actually, partly our fault, we haven't articulated. I'm just going to share another resource with you if you're into reading. There's this book by a girl called Jeremy Brandt. He is late Jeremy Brandt. He's died now, but he worked for 30 years in Bristol in UK, and went, as he was a youth worker, he went and got his PhD as well, and wrote profoundly, never published, and just always remained a very committed youth worker doing amazing work. When he died, some friends found some of his writings, and they decided to actually put it together in this book called Searching for Community. It's a beautiful book about some of his observations over time in that community, which is, again, this is the kind of stuff that I think we got to do. Like, you know, Jeremy for 30 years even did it, but never published it, never put it out. And it was just his friends. And I don't know what is it about us youth workers that almost shy away from actually telling our stories publicly and actually getting people to understand what it is that we do, because a lot of people don't know. The government, but a lot of people in the community don't know what a youth worker does, what it takes to actually do the work that we do.
Yeah, I think you're right. But the other factor is I think government has been reluctant to listen. So we do need more voices. You know, I'll give you an example. We had a school principal that had been referring kids to our camps for 4 years, and she did this incredible video interview for us, which we actually showed to the then Minister of Communities in, I think, 2008, 2009. And he actually pledged to give us funding. But with Anna Bligh coming in, everything changed. But the video that we had posted on our website, the principal was actually threatened to convince us to take it off the website because the government didn't want her promoting a non-government program.
Oh, shame.
And I believe she was demoted to a smaller school.
Anyone else that hasn't had a chance to
we know best at it.
go on?
Siyavash, I threw into the comments thing just after you were talking a question, and a couple of people have responded. I'd be curious to hear a little bit more from others too. So saying that your stories and experience speak to the importance of work that encompasses true holistic practice, outreach, including travel and transport with young people, community work, individual support, community capacity building, and being able to respond to a range of issues, which in my world we call generalist practice. I'm curious what people in the what people here today are hearing from young people right now that would make a difference in their lives to reduce the risk of criminalisation. And I'm hoping I pronounced your name correctly. Is it Gary?
No, it's Nairi. You were close.
Nairi, sorry, Nairi. Nairi's
No.
up in Townsville. Are you happy for me to read this out loud?
Yeah, go for it. Yep.
Yeah, so Nairi said, what I'm hearing up here in Townsville is that our young people are seeking activities and social programs and skills workshops for a sense of belonging and connection, informal learning available to all young people, not just those at risk, but all. Help them feel seen, important, and valued within our community, places to hang out where they feel welcome and safe, outside of service delivery and business hours. And then Wendy has also chimed in that she's very often hearing from young people that they're missing free, cheap stuff to do and safe places to go. And Alex from the Night Cafe is seconding Nairi's comment that the reduced availability to engage in activities on top of the reduction of access to public third spaces is what you're hearing.
I particularly like what Nairi said about all kids, because that in and of itself, if you say this is for kids at risk, kids don't want to be there. They don't want to self-identify as that. They don't want to hang with just kids like that. It's just, I kind of liken it to that narrowing of social housing criteria, in that it used to be like, I'm a nurse, I could have been, in social housing. A lot of people could have been in social housing and were raised in social housing, not because they were of a particular marginalized group, but now social housing is really only for the quite strictly marginalized. And when you look at these youth programs, if you restrict them, then that in and of itself is a huge barrier.
If I can talk to I use the word, or I quite often reference, like I did in that point, to all and not just those at risk, only because I would definitely identify that we've got those that have fallen in the river and those that are standing on the riverbank about to jump in. And I think that they're a target group that are often missed in service delivery models. If you haven't entered the system yet, you're not eligible. And yet we really want to, as that primary prevention model states, identify ways of supporting young people before they get to that place where we can. And I think that a lot of what I'm hearing, so I've done a little bit of direct engagement with some high school students around Mental Health Week over the last few weeks. We had 300 responses to a single question about how we can make our city a better place for young people to grow up in. Really simple question, but it could be interpreted in so many different ways. And the responses were really varied but wonderful. To speak a bit to the work I think it's Brett does in the adventure space, out of over 300 responses, about 90 responses from the young people lent into young people wanting to connect to high risk outdoor activities. So developmentally, we know that that's appropriate for teen-based or teenage groups. And they're essentially saying that places and spaces designed in communities are so often aimed at younger children, primary age to the playgrounds. The majority of them are designed in ways that are not engaging or interesting at all to those who are in that teen space. And then the spaces that we do dedicate to them are skate parks. And what percentage of our youth population ride skateboards? Great for some, but really not at all helpful for others. So it's looking at those solutions from a local council perspective. What infrastructure, what sort of spaces and places do we need to be providing that the youth demographic are actually going to get in there and be a part of? So we're looking at those sort of solutions in our community at the moment, what we can put in and provide, because even places like skate parks, obviously Townsville has a bit of a vibe at the moment around our youth crime and things like that. People still look at those spaces and align them with this youth narrative of what are they up to and what are they doing there, and yet they're the spaces that we've built and designed specifically for them. And then we talk about it and they're like, why are they there at 8 o'clock at night? Well, because we built it and that's why they went there. I think we need a more positive narrative around those spaces, but we need to, so many of the young kids said, we want more parks. And so we've gone and reflected on that and gone, well, we've got more than 200 parks. So what is it about our existing parks that's not meeting their need? Is it that there's not enough shady places to sit? Is there no cold water bubblers? Do they want access to free Wi-Fi in the park? So if they're going to sit and gather in spaces that are not bothering neighbours or, you know, whatever else, what else can we put in the existing infrastructure to make it more youth friendly and to make them feel like their needs are being accounted for as well?
And it speaks sorry, Wendy, it speaks so strongly to that narrative that young people aren't welcome. You're not welcome here. And we don't want you gathering. We don't want you loitering. We don't want you being in groups. Like, we actually send a really consistently strong message that you are not welcome. And I've been saying for the last 12 months, there's like structurally lots of fragmentation of youth servicing. Funding has been shit. Like, it's really, really worn us down. And this narrative is incredibly thin. So I just feel like we've got to find it somewhere to really start amping up a much bigger and richer narrative about how young people add value to the community.
Definitely. I think when we talk about safe places, talking to young people and talking to staff in those places that youth go, often it's about intergenerationally. If, for example, a skate park, and I would often say, oh, like, that's, you know, council's response is like, oh, let's build a skate park. But actually a whole lot of young people won't go there because they feel unsafe, because there's other young people there. Whereas South Bank, I did a lot of mental health training with the staff at South Bank, the lifeguards, the security guards, and young people, when they go there, they would say, oh, we feel safe because we know there's people that are here to look after us if we do the wrong thing, if other young people do the wrong thing. And so it's that mentorship, and they feel welcome to some degree. And feeling welcome and being part of that community means that they're going to want to contribute and give back to that community as well.
I think that councils have a great opportunity as well to make sure that when they're putting out school holiday guides and programs and endorsing and supporting activities and engagements in their community through their grants and partnerships, I think it's really important that the community goes for those things and provides workshops and free courses and skill building. Young people in that kind of 12 to 17 age bracket are trying to figure out who they are and what makes them tick. So opportunities to dabble in different sorts of skills helps with that identification, finding people with similar interests. It builds this social cohesion within their own demographic, which is really strong and powerful. And it can be delivered in such an easy way through opportunity. So a lot of our local young people within the surveys that we did want to be able to learn how to do certain arts and crafts at the library, or attend men's shed type programs where they can learn how to fix their bike, you know, and they can get positive mentorship, but not through a traditional service delivery model where it's a clinical type environment, but actually just through connection and skill building and that sort of thing. A lot of the young people said that they wanted more of that in our community spaces as well.
Yeah.
Can I just ask people also that haven't had a chance to say anything? Cara, Angela, Alexa, Nate, Gabrielle, Jess, Amber, Marco, is there any questions or any statements you want to make? Just making sure that you get the opportunity. Let's come visually.
Yeah, so I'm a sort of outreach worker on the Gold Coast. I facilitate the street food outreach once a week. So Gold Coast, have been doing it for just over a year now. Hearing a lot of the same things that we're coming across. Our demographics are a little different, so it's unique to the Gold Coast. But in terms of what the kids are saying, it's going to be boredom. So we're constantly trying to just plug those holes and plug those gaps in terms of things they can do, recreational, pro-social. There's just not enough education to be mentioned. It's just more about where in a space now can we change our model of outreach to accommodate something for the young people for an evening, or for that evening. Would normally be outreach, could now be, because our need has changed also down here, where last year was primarily homelessness, and now it's more so lovely way of putting it was about the river. Kids are jumping into the river now, so yeah, totally that's what we're dealing with down here as our younger cohorts, 10 to 13 years. So I love the groundwork, front lines for me. I can hear a lot of political stuff. That's not what I'm familiar with, but I know it plays a pinnacle role in our role and function on the ground. So yeah, no, that's it for me. Thanks.
Thanks, Nate. Appreciate sharing that. Yeah. Anyone else that hasn't spoken so far? Any statements, questions? Oh, sorry, some mic doesn't seem to be connecting, Jess. Thank you all. This has been such an interesting. Jess, if there's anything that you want to question or statement, happy if you want to talk away. And Gabrielle, you've got your camera on. I gather you want to say something. You're mute though. Can you take yourself off mute, Gabrielle? Yep. No, still can't hear you. Is your volume up? No, sorry. You might have to type. Something's wrong. Just says we have 0 to 8 services and.
Is that working now?
Yes.
Yes, it was the settings. Yeah, I always have problems with. No, we're just looking, working regionally. We have 2 workers across the whole city, and just wondering how best to have an impact across Brisbane, working regionally. So we try and focus on the more at-risk and vulnerable areas, and work with organisations, because it's hard to do direct work. We're not youth workers, being community development officers. So we work with organisations that work with young people and try and develop up collaborative responses through the networks, and then also by trying to fund stuff on the ground that's effective and that young people wanting. Just for example, we're doing some after school basketball at Carroll Park, where there's absolutely nothing happening in that area. People know it, it's next to the highway outside of Inala, Carroll Park. And the first afternoon we had 11 young people turn up, and the older teenage age group, not a younger age group. So yeah, just trying to look at ways to plug some gaps. And at our interagency a couple of weeks ago, we had Dr. William Wood from Griffith Uni, who's a criminologist at Gold Coast Uni. And that was absolutely inspiring. So we're looking at trying to get together a working group to look at ways of, I guess, having some positive narratives around young people, and how can we do that as a collective through the interagency, and do that at the service delivery level, but also positive conversations with community. And through our organisations, and advocate up as well, because all we're hearing about is the negative youth crime stuff, and it's just not accurate. The stats aren't saying that. Domestic violence is what's on the increase. Yeah, so looking at ways of how we can counter that narrative, because it's really disheartening. And how can we do that best, I guess, as a network.
Thanks, Gabrielle. That's very important work. And there was a question for you from Nairi saying, do you have a youth council there?
There's the Lord Mayor's Youth Advisory Council. They had their final meeting today. That's 70 grade 10 students across the city that gather 4 times a year. And then the Lord Mayor turns up, and various councillors. So that's mainly young people with high capacity attend those. So that's something that happens from Brisbane City Council. But I guess in our CD role in the youth development team, we try and focus on more vulnerable and at-risk young people, because that Lord Mayor's Youth Advisory Council is for more young people with a high capacity, and they're the young leaders, I guess.
About sometimes those mixed populations, though, isn't it? Like whether at any level of your community, some the rich stuff comes when you have mixed populations of formal leaders and the informal leaders, and then they get that understanding between themselves as well, and then they become advocates on both sides of the fence.
Yeah.
Gab, that work you're doing with the narrative, is that just your South Side based agencies?
Yeah, but
it would be good to see how we can link that stuff together.
Yeah, that would be great. He's amazing, William Wood. He does a lot of stuff in the media. I think they go to him for comments, and he just, he just has these really good statements that we're not going to incarcerate our way out of this problem, and it's the most expensive way to make a problem worse. I mean, just some of those things that he says, just really impactful.
I'm aware it's now 5:02. Now, happy to stay on if people are wanting to chat away, but is there anything else that anybody wants to say? I'm also happy to continue this discussion if you're wanting to send email or where I am at Yank. So happy to continue this discussion, answer any questions, and if there's nothing else that anyone wants to say, just want to thank you for joining the session, for sharing your thoughts, your wisdom, and putting up with mine, and bring the meeting to a close.
There's one question there, Siyavash, that Alex wants to know where we find the recorded sessions.
Okay, the recording sessions, I will put it up hopefully tomorrow, and it's on where do we find it? It would be on the Yanks. We got a YouTube channel, and I will send a link. So are you on any of our social media or any of the like the Facebook Youth Work Queensland?
I don't think my organization is.
No. That's one of the places that we'll put a link, but there is a YouTube channel, and I will share that with everybody that had registered. So there was quite a few people who couldn't make it. So even you guys who attended, I'll just make sure that the whole mailing list gets that link.
And I think the only thing I was left thinking about is just something I've seen, and it's the erosion of funded services. There's just simply not enough youth workers on the ground, so then you erode what you can actually achieve. But this interface of change is whole of community. Like, we're talking about whole of youth population, but we're actually, there's this layering of whole of community stuff, and that absolutely we want for young people activities by young people, like that stuff's important. But if our general population, if our adult population isn't hearing and engaged and challenged on the stereotypes they hold, this won't change. So I feel like that youth work perception also needs to grow back some of its layers of realizing that we're advocates for community-led change as well.
I think that comes back to sharing our stories as well, Kate, and sharing the stories of the young people in our communities that are doing amazing things. So I know that as a small youth council, within our own social media platforms, we're constantly trying to share other localized stories from young people in our community doing great things to elevate and help to change that narrative. It's like that whole there's always bad news in the media, that the negative narrative is always there. Everybody loves the juicy, nasty story. But we're trying really hard. Our youth council has been in the local paper, I think 3 times this year. And again, showing that we've got young people in our community being a part of change. Our youth council are involved in the seniors luncheons and are volunteering at things and having a presence in the community where we're saying, hey, there's young people doing great things. Let's celebrate those as well. So we're really trying very, very hard to change that youth narrative here. It's small stuff. It's not big. But I think that everything counts. The sharing those wonderful stories is part of changing that narrative.
Yeah, I'm with you. I feel like I'm hearing from younger or newer youth workers, though, some reluctance to stories as the mechanism of change, which is not my practice. I'm a CD practitioner, so that's my thing. But where the pushback I'm hearing is poverty porn, that it's seen as services leveraging off the story of the vulnerable people that access their support. And I reckon there's another conversation to be had about the difference of that.
Yeah. I don't think we'll see, because we're not acting out of a service delivery model, and I'm a CD practitioner here in my role. It is all about elevating what the young people are doing, not connected to a service, not labeling it as anything specific, but just them being out in the community as civilians, as residents, as members of our community, and being valuable and being valued in their contribution and what they bring, even if it's not through acts of service, but just by being young people. So really elevating the value of their voice, elevating the value of their lived experience and their perspective on our communities and how they can be better. I think that that's all really, really important.
And maybe that's where it's this leadership by local gov, because that's where some community development roles sit right now.
That's right.
And whether or not you tap into those new community development roles sitting in all of the Queensland neighbourhood centres, because
correct.
I can bet they are completely disconnected from young people. To be that leader of that space, which then might support workers engaged in service delivery roles to engage in it without feeling yicky.
Well, we have a really beautiful connection, Kate, that sounds a little bit different to the example Gabrielle gave, in that our youth council isn't made up of all high-performing young academic kids. It was when I came on board a little while ago, but we've actually worked really hard to diversify. I worked really, really hard on a day-to-day basis to build relationships with local community service providers who run other sorts of youth programs, to say, hey, that your young people, when they are in a place and space of wellness, that they have a story to share or have lived experience, their voice is important. And our youth council is a platform of actual action and advocacy, where young people can feel empowered to have a voice and contribute to change in our community, where we've got reportable outcomes. So it's not just tokenistic, come and join and talk about some things, but no action will come of it. I sit there as the facilitator to say, well, what do you want? Here's our budget. What can we do with this budget to make actual change? This year, back in June, last year, youth councillors came to me and said, we want more activities to do. We want access to the arts. We want to be able to get involved in things, but we don't know where to start. And there's always things for adults. Townsville is really well renowned for some of its amazing arts programs. And there's often things for young kids delivered through galleries and libraries as a service provision, but the youth demographic outside of school don't always have a lot of opportunity here to tap into creative arts and performing arts. So as a youth council last year, we pitched to the North Australia Festival of the Arts here in Townsville. I went to their producer and said, hey, can I host a 3-day youth arts festival? He said yes, and then I panicked and went, But we did. So back in June, July this year, we delivered a 3-day youth arts festival within NAFA, funded by the Townsville Youth Council and supported by the team in NAFA. And there was 13 free workshops to youth across the spectrum of the performing and creative arts. So everything from beatboxing and vocal percussion to rap, body percussion, pottery, screen printing, musical theatre, dance, all these different things. And there was 2 performing nights as well. And that was delivered for free within NAFA. And it was delivered by my youth counsellors. So I had 4 of them do work experience with the NAFA and the events team in the lead up. So they did the bump ins and the bump outs with the workshop providers. They helped me with the ticketing. We engaged local schools to create giant artworks to activate the space. We made sure that there were several workshops that were sensory reduced as well, to allow those who identify as being more neurodivergent to be able to access what we were delivering as well. And over the three days, we had over 700 local young people pass through and get involved. And this was a concept that was grown out of my youth counsellors saying, hey, we want to do more stuff. And me going, okay, well, let's take a risk and try something big. I probably wouldn't do it again in the same format. I was broken at the end of it. It was really difficult, and I definitely bit off more than I could chew. But it definitely looked at a gap. It gives us something to grow from and learn from, in that I don't think I'd do it in a centralized location moving forward, but have it out in different pockets. What we found was that the offering of it all being free was actually not helpful, because we had some things that were fully booked out and then people just didn't show up, which was disappointing for the money invested in getting the service providers to deliver workshops. We still paid for them. They were free to the community, but it still came out of my budget. So many great learnings. And young people can say, hey, we want more to do, but will they actually show up? But it's still just an abundance of learning from it. It was exciting for our youth counsellors to know that they can have a voice and an idea, and that with that mentorship and support, we could grow it into something. We just did a movie screening for Queensland Mental Health Week. So again, youth counsellors want to do something relative to young people, but also for people who work as youth workers or high school teachers. So we were a little bit brave, and we showed a mental illness documentary, an Australian one called Pieces, which had very, very strong content. And it was quite difficult for me to get across the line as far as working with a council, within a council paradigm, which is quite risk averse. But they did say yes eventually. We put lots of wraparounds in place to support our viewers, to make sure that if anybody was triggered, they'd be well supported. Anyway, we had 65 people come to the movie screening and watch a film about diagnosed mental illness. Or mental ill health. And the youth counsellors, again, were the MCs for the event, did the ticketing for the event, helped me coordinate and run the event. And it was attended by a 50-50 ratio of young people and adults. So again, it was contextual, and that was all shaped by our youth counsellors saying, we don't want to go to a workshop or a forum on mental illness. We want to do something different. And the movie screening was the suggestion that came out of that, free popcorn and free drinks. And it still helped to destigmatise and address an issue that meant something to them. So I think youth councils as a platform have that real ability to connect in with people with that lived experience. They don't need to be high academic achievers. As community development workers, we're there to support them with their ideas and help bring it all to life for them, and show them, I guess, that you don't need to be academic to be successful and contribute to your community. And belong in that space. Sorry, that was a big old rant. I just wanted to share.
That's great.
Yeah, I was curious how you got that diverse engagement with the young people from up there, especially when sometimes the diverse community has lower capacity to engage.
Yep, absolutely. So some of it was me actually going out to service providers as an individual and saying, look, we do want to hear from your young people. In what format would they be most comfortable or interested in engaging? A lot of it is face-to-face meetings with them outside of the youth council platform, so that if they do decide to come to a youth council meeting and be a part of it, I'm a familiar face, I'm a friendly face, and just managing their entry into youth council in a really gentle manner. So young people can come and just sit in and observe for 2 or 3 meetings before they actually have to even really tell me their name. There's not a lot of pressure. We changed the format of where we met so that it's not in a closed room. There's a doorway that's open at all times. It's in a public space, so you don't feel like you're entrapped within a space, and that once you walk through the door, it's going to be, the anxiety builds and you feel awful if you need to leave. Being an open space, you can get up and excuse yourself and it's not as obvious. With some demographics, we've identified that they just don't cross over the threshold. And so it's me actually engaging with programs within the high schools and things. A lot of our First Nations groups, I've tried and tried again to try and get them to engage. And they're not necessarily interested in being part of the youth council, but I see it as my responsibility of finding a way to go out to them and engage in their space. So I think that youth surveys where you're going to them, where their own youth workers and staff that work with them every day can guide them through having a say, if that makes sense, as opposed to them coming to me, and just being really flexible in that arrangement. It all contributes to the overall picture and all of the data. We still have our core group members, and within that group, we've got one young person who is on NDIS and comes with her support worker, and she's blossoming. She's come in as somebody who didn't feel valued or heard, and she is growing so beautifully in her confidence and her contribution to the group. It's amazing. We've got 4 young people who come from non-English speaking backgrounds, and they bring an amazing perspective. We're working towards making sure our marketing and our collateral has multiple language options as well. But then I'm engaging again with Multicultural Australia here locally and some of their youth programs, and just building up that relationship. So it's a lot of proactive outreach, and not just expecting everybody to come to me, but actually going out and saying, hey, we actually really want to hear what you've got to say. Happy to sit with you, happy for you to talk to somebody that you want to talk to, and they can email your perspective, and just working really hard all the time to provide. And
Nari, it sounds like it's that, it's that weaving together the many ways young people share their input, and there's that traditional model of youth participation, which is turning up to a meeting, but you've named all of those other functions of how young people do have a say and contribute within the context of their world. And I think, it makes me think about the ways my team's worked over the many years, and we've probably never really had a strong physical presence at meetings of young people that we support, because a lot of them are experiencing homelessness, but they've always been able to find ways, and we've always found ways of weaving that stuff in, and that it just adds such a diversity to the picture.
Yeah, that's right. But acknowledging too, though, Kate, that we do have young people that we need to recognise that their basic needs aren't being met, and being part of a youth council or having a say in that space is absolutely not a priority right now. But for them to at least be aware that one day, should it become a priority, they know that we exist. They know that there's hope in knowing that there is a platform for youth voice, even if you don't want to be the person standing on it. There's a sense of hope in just knowing that there is an opportunity for young people to have an opinion, influence change, be part of actual events and things. Even if you don't have the courage, or you're a young person that doesn't have that kind of drive within them, just like everybody in our adult communities as well. We don't all want to be the person doing the things. Doesn't mean that inwardly we don't celebrate those that do. I think there's a lot of power in that.
And I think it sounds like, if we're talking about practice sharing and story sharing, that maybe there's a story to be shared through Yank's network right here. Some way that you and Nari and Siyavash can, I just think, I've just been to the community development conference 2 weeks ago, right? And most of those workshops were sitting down and talking about a piece of work, which then got people thinking about something in their own worlds. We don't really...
Helene James, who sat within the compassionate community space, sits next to me. We work together. So she's essentially a mentor of mine as well.
And in youth world, we don't really get resourced for those kinds of things. So there's other ways that we need to hear and connect into those stories.
What we last time we've had a state youth affairs conference, it's been about 11 years ago. It used to be a biannual thing, but we haven't had one. But what we're thinking about is next year is doing a series of podcasts which for the last 2 years we've done with young people in resi care, and that's been, people have found them quite useful. And now we want to expand that to work with youth workers and others in the field to share some of their practice wisdom. People apparently are telling us that they like podcasts, they listen to it on the way home or somewhere when they're driving, and so that's yeah, it could be opportunity if Naira, you're up to it. So we can have you one of us, the first cabs off the rank.
Yeah. I'm always open. I'd need approvals because I'm still a pretty lowly fish in the sea. So I'd need all my proper approvals, but I'd always happy for a chat.
Right.
Siyavash, we've got a fabulous podcasting station and visible link. So come in with young people and record there at the studio, please.
For sure.
Yeah.
No, we will take that on. Yeah, definitely. We need that. Great. All right. Well, it's 5:20, so I think we should bring this to a close. So we go and do whatever we do in the evening. And thank you again. It was really good, particularly hearing you. And I'll see you next time. And yeah, have a good evening.
Thanks. Bye, Mary. Bye, Gab.
See you, everybody. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.